Hi everyone, waving hand. I'm posting from a throwaway because I honestly don't know who else to turn to. Please share your thoughts or advice in the comments, I really need outside perspective. I, 34M, thought I hit the jackpot when I met Claire, 32F. She was smart, spontaneous, and had this way of convincing me life could be bigger than I imagined. We got married after 3 years of dating, and for the most part things were steady until she started talking about a fresh start abroad. Claire always dreamed of living in Europe. She said she wanted to live somewhere with history, not just traffic lights and chain stores. I liked my quiet routine back home, but she looked at me with those wide eyes and said, "Imagine us drinking wine on cobbled streets." I caved. I sold my car, broke the lease on our apartment, and switched my job to full remote. We landed in Lisbon with 2 suitcases, a short-term rental, and the promise of something new. At first, it was amazing: late-night walks along the river, little cafés, new friends who invited us to beach barbecues. But about a month in, I started noticing things that didn't add up. Her work visa was still processing. She never let me see the emails from her supposed employer. She'd slip out for errands and come back flustered if I asked where she'd been. One evening, while I was cooking, she took a call on the balcony. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intimate. Not flirty exactly, but like someone talking to a person they knew very, very well. When I stepped outside, she ended the call so fast you'd think her phone was on fire. I told myself we were just adjusting to expat life. But there was a knot in my stomach I couldn't untie, like she was standing in the same room with me but living a story I didn't know. After that balcony call, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about Claire's fresh start was off. I'm not proud of what I did next, but curiosity, and maybe self-preservation, got the better of me. It started small. I offered to help organize her visa paperwork since I had free time between projects. She laughed it off and said, "Oh, babe, it's all in Portuguese legal jargon. You'd just get frustrated." That stung. I'm not fluent, but I can read a form. One rainy afternoon, while she was out on yet another errand, I noticed an envelope sticking out of her tote bag. It had the logo of the immigration office on it. My name wasn't anywhere on the front, but hers was, with a surname I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long time, torn between respecting her privacy and wanting to know why my wife apparently had a second last name. Finally, I slipped the letter out. Inside was a receipt for a solicitado de certidão de casamento, a request for a marriage certificate. The date on the document was months before we ever left home. That discovery opened a floodgate. I started noticing things I'd brushed off. The way our landlord asked if we wanted to add a second name to the lease but looked at Claire strangely when I said we were already married. A shopkeeper who once called her Señora Duarte instead of Mrs. Reynolds. She brushed it off, said he must have mixed her up with someone else. The calls that came at odd hours, numbers with Portuguese country codes, names I didn't know. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the sink. A preview flashed. "I'm so glad you're finally back. We need to talk about the papers." I didn't open the message, just stared at the screen until it went dark again. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, peering into a canyon I hadn't known existed. And I couldn't decide if I wanted to back away, or find out just how deep it went. After a week of sleepless nights replaying that text on her phone, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I waited until a quiet Sunday morning, no errands, no calls, just us and the smell of coffee. My hands were trembling as I set her mug on the table. "Claire," I said, trying to sound calm, "who's messaging you about papers?" Her spoon froze mid-stir. For a split second, something flashed across her face: panic? Guilt? Then she slipped on that cool smile she always used when she wanted to steer a conversation. "Oh, that? Just the relocation agency," she said lightly. "They help with bureaucracy stuff." I pushed the immigration receipt across the table. "Does the agency usually request a marriage certificate? And why does it have a different surname?" Her jaw tightened. "You went through my things?" she shot back, voice suddenly sharp. "Mark, that's a massive invasion of privacy." Instead of explaining, she attacked. Classic Claire. I didn't let go. Are you married here, Claire? Before we came? She laughed a brittle, too loud laugh and shook her head. Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. You've been on edge since we moved, maybe you're projecting. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. Then she tried another tactic, softer this time. She reached across the table, placed her hand on mine, and said, "Look, all the paperwork is complicated. There's an old registry error, I'm fixing it, okay? Please, don't stress about it." I wanted to believe her, but the calm felt rehearsed, and the warmth in her voice didn't match the tension in her body. That morning, I realized something important. Claire wasn't just hiding a detail. She was building walls around a whole other life. And I just started scratching the paint. After that Sunday morning showdown, the air in our apartment felt heavy, like I was wading through fog every time I moved. Claire went about her days as if nothing had happened, cheerful texts to friends, humming while she made tea, but there was a stiffness in her smile, a guardedness in her eyes. Meanwhile, I was unraveling. I'd sit at my desk, supposedly working, and instead just stare at the immigration receipt lying in my drawer. Every few hours, my mind would replay our conversation, her brittle laugh, the way she pivoted from anger to sweetness like she was flipping a switch. At night, lying next to her, I couldn't turn off the questions. Who was she talking to? What papers did they mean? Had our entire marriage been built on sand? I caught myself rereading old messages from when we first started dating. Back then, she'd text me little things like, "Can't wait to see you tonight, face blowing a kiss." Now our chats were logistical: groceries, laundry, grab milk on your way back. It was as if a trapdoor had opened under the version of Claire I'd loved, and I was staring up at a stranger wearing her face. I also began noticing her little manipulations more clearly: how she'd subtly guilt-trip me for bringing up the visa delays, how she'd steer conversations away from anything about her past here. When I asked if she had friends in Lisbon before we moved, she laughed it off. "Mark, if I had a secret life, don't you think you'd know?" But I didn't know. That was the point. One night I walked along the river alone, watching the lights ripple on the water, and felt this sick mix of grief and anger. Grief for the woman I thought she was, anger at myself for being so willing to uproot everything for someone who might never have been fully mine. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just hurt, I was humiliated. I'd left my whole life behind to build something new with Claire, and now it seemed I'd been building on a lie. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending we were just another couple adjusting to expat life. After that night by the river, I knew I couldn't just sit in the fog anymore. Either I'd go crazy second-guessing everything, or I'd finally shine a light into the corners Claire kept shuttered. The next morning, while she headed out for an early coffee with a colleague, I opened my laptop and started combing through every scrap of paper we'd collected since moving. Rental contract, bank forms, immigration emails, anything that might explain why her name kept shifting like sand. One line on a utility bill jumped out: Claire Duarte Reese. I froze. Reese wasn't my surname. I'd never heard it mentioned once in our 4 years together. I tried the polite route first. Texted her, "Hey, quick cue, why does the electricity account say Duarte Reese?" She left me on read for 40 minutes, then replied, "Oh, the clerk must have copied an old record. Don't worry, I'll fix it." That answer didn't sit right. So I called the power company myself. The woman on the phone hesitated before telling me that, yes, the account was first opened 3 years ago, long before we moved, and the name Duarte Reese wasn't a typo. It was the legal owner. A chill ran through me. Claire hadn't just arrived in Lisbon as a blank slate. She'd come home. That evening, I decided to stop playing defense. When she announced she was running a quick errand, I waited 10 minutes and followed her. My heart hammered as I trailed her through narrow streets until she ducked into a notary's office. Through the glass I saw her shake hands with a man in a dark blazer, someone who looked far too comfortable sliding paperwork across the desk toward her. I didn't burst in. I just stood there in the drizzle, trying to swallow the truth rising in my throat. My wife wasn't arranging a visa. She was tending to a life I'd never been invited into. And I couldn't decide what scared me more, what she was hiding, or how much of myself I'd already lost trying to believe her. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Claire in that notary's office, leaning over papers with a man who clearly wasn't just an agent. By morning, exhaustion felt like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. I decided if I was going to confront her again, I needed more than scraps, I needed something undeniable. While she showered, I opened the drawer where she kept her passport and a thin folder of documents. I'd never gone near them before, we'd always respected each other's privacy. But privacy doesn't work when you suspect the person beside you is living a second life. Inside the folder, I found a stamped letter from the Portuguese Civil Registry. My pulse spiked as I translated the lines with Google: certificate of marriage, Claire Duarte and Miguel Reis. The date was 4 years ago, a full year before she and I even met. I sat there staring at that paper, feeling like someone had switched the world's gravity. She hadn't just lied about a visa, she'd lied about being free to marry me at all. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the document when she called from the bathroom, asking if I'd seen her phone. I shoved everything back, forcing my face into neutrality before she walked out, hair damp, smiling faintly. That day I couldn't focus on work. I replayed every moment of our relationship through this new lens, the gaps in her stories about traveling solo before we met, the vague references to friends back in Europe, how she'd refused to have a church wedding because courthouses are simpler. By evening, I couldn't keep pretending. I told her I needed air and headed for the small cafe on the corner where the owner, Joao, sometimes chatted with me in halting English. I asked, as casually as I could, if he knew how long Claire had been in Lisbon before we moved. He gave me a look that made my stomach drop. Claire? She lived here many years, he said slowly. With her esposo? Husband? Miguel. Tall man, black hair. They come here on Sundays. I must have gone pale, because Joao immediately apologized, thinking he'd said something wrong. But he hadn't. He'd just confirmed what that document already screamed. On my walk home, the city looked unfamiliar, the tiles too bright, the air too damp. I felt like a guest in a place that wasn't just geographically foreign, it was emotionally alien. My marriage had been hollowed out and stuffed with stories I hadn't been allowed to read. Back at the apartment, Claire was curled up on the sofa with a book, as if my whole world hadn't just detonated. She glanced up and smiled, that same easy smile that used to make me feel safe. Now it felt like a mask, carefully molded so I wouldn't see the life beating just underneath. I realized then I wasn't just angry. I was grieving a future I'd imagined, a wife I thought I knew, a version of myself who believed love meant honesty. The next step was clear, even if it terrified me, I needed to hear her say it. No more paperwork, no more strangers filling in blanks. I had to make her put the truth into words, even if it shattered whatever we had left. I waited until the next evening to confront her. I wanted her calm, no distractions, and I wanted to make sure I wouldn't just explode. After dinner I cleared the plates, set them on the counter, then sat back down across from her. My heart was drumming so loudly it drowned out the hum of the fridge. Claire, I said, steady but low, I know about Miguel. She blinked once, slowly, then tilted her head like I just mispronounced a word. Who? I pulled the stamped letter from my pocket and laid it on the table between us. Her name. His name. The date. All there in black ink. For a heartbeat she stared at it in silence, and I could see a dozen stories assembling behind her eyes, like cards she was about to play. Finally she sighed, a quiet, theatrical sound. Okay, she said. Yes. I was married. It was complicated. I didn't tell you because it was over, Mark. Legally messy, but over. Over? I felt my voice rising. You're still married. This isn't an old receipt, it's a certificate. She shrugged, reaching for her glass of wine. Paperwork takes time. We were separated before you and I met. I couldn't believe how calm she looked, as if being caught in a huge lie was just a minor inconvenience. When I asked why she'd dragged me across the world if she wasn't even free, she put the glass down and leaned in, voice dropping to a soothing purr, because I love you, and you make me happy. Miguel was a mistake, I was trapped. You're the life I wanted. She reached for my hand. I pulled it back. That's when her tone sharpened. Mark, you're overreacting. Do you have any idea how stressful this move has been for me? You don't understand how difficult Portuguese bureaucracy is. I didn't tell you because you'd panic exactly like this. The words hit me like cold water. She wasn't apologizing, she was trying to rewrite reality again, make me question if my anger was reasonable. I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd uprooted my life for, and felt something inside me settle. I wasn't crazy. She was simply someone who built comfort out of other people's trust, and I'd been the latest brick in her wall. The hours after that confrontation blurred together into a haze of silence. Claire drifted through the apartment as if nothing had happened, scrolling on her phone, humming while she folded laundry. I sat at the table long after the dishes were dry, staring at the marriage certificate like it might rearrange its own words if I just watched long enough. I felt split in two. One part of me still wanted to believe her version, some harmless bureaucratic tangle, a past she hadn't mentioned because it was too messy. But the other part, the part with a knot in its gut since the balcony phone call, knew she'd built a whole architecture of lies, brick by brick, and I'd been living inside it. That night I couldn't bear to share a bed with her. I grabbed a blanket and stretched out on the couch. She padded out an hour later, hair mussed, holding her pillow. "Mark, come back to bed," she whispered. "We can talk in the morning." I didn't move. "I don't even know who you are," I said, voice hoarse. Something flickered in her face, annoyance, not remorse. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she snapped. "Do you think I dragged you across the world just to hurt you? Miguel and we were done years ago. I just never filed the papers." It doesn't mean anything. But it meant everything. It meant every toast we made to our new life had been built on sand. Over the next few days, I went through stages I didn't even have names for: raw anger, bone-deep sadness, humiliation that made me want to crawl out of my skin. I'd catch myself remembering the way she smiled when we signed the lease on our flat here, or how she kissed me on the cheek our first night in Lisbon, and then I'd picture her in that notary's office, calmly maintaining a marriage I didn't exist in. Sleep became impossible. I walked aimlessly through the city at night, past couples laughing in cafés, past glowing windows where people were cooking, living, trusting each other. I felt like a ghost, invisible to a world that still believed in the things I'd just lost. And yet, under the grief, another feeling crept in: clarity. For the first time since this started, I could see the pattern. Claire didn't stumble into this, she curated it. She'd chosen which truths I could see, which names I could hear, which paperwork I could touch. The realization hurt, but it also sharpened something inside me. I couldn't change the past, but I didn't have to keep playing a part in her script. The question was no longer, is she lying? I had my answer. The question was, what do I do with the wreckage? When you discover your wife is legally married to someone else, people imagine the decision is simple: you pack your bags, you leave, end of story. But life never collapses that neatly. It shatters in jagged pieces, and you spend your days cutting yourself on the edges while trying to figure out which way is up. For a week after I found out, I lived in that limbo. Claire acted as if the confrontation had been nothing but a small argument about bills. She made breakfast, asked if I wanted to join her on errands, even suggested we plan a weekend trip to Porto to clear our heads. It was surreal, like she was performing a play in which I was supposed to pretend I hadn't read the script already. Meanwhile, I was drowning. I'd wake up nauseous, heart pounding, like my body already knew my marriage was over before my brain could catch up. Work calls blurred into background noise. I caught myself rereading the same line of an email 20 times. Finally, I forced myself to call a lawyer, not one of the flashy expat firms Claire had suggested when we first moved, but a small local office recommended by Joao, the cafe owner who'd first mentioned Miguel. Sitting in that modest waiting room, surrounded by framed certificates and the hum of an ancient ceiling fan, I felt like I was stepping outside of Claire's carefully controlled world for the first time. The lawyer listened quietly as I explained, then pulled up public records on his computer. Within minutes, there it was: Claire Duarte married to Miguel Reis, marriage still active. He looked at me with a mix of sympathy and professionalism. "Legally, senor, your marriage to her has no standing here." Hearing it said aloud by a stranger was like being slammed against a wall. I'd suspected, but a part of me had still hoped there was some bureaucratic loophole, some explanation that didn't make me a fool. Instead, I had just received confirmation that, on paper, I was no one to her. I asked what my options were. He was blunt: if I wanted to protect myself, I needed to document everything. Keep copies of her paperwork, her messages, any proof of deception. And I needed to decide if I was staying in Portugal or not. She has obligations here that do not involve you, he said carefully. You must think of your future, independent of hers. Walking back through the streets after that meeting, I felt both gutted and strangely lighter. Gutted because my marriage had just been declared a fiction. Lighter because the fog was gone, no more guessing, no more knots in my stomach. The truth was out, and it was ugly, but it was real. That night, I confronted her one last time. I laid the printed record on the table. You're still married to him. You lied to me for years. Claire didn't flinch. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat down across from me, and said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Miguel and I haven't been together in ages. We just never filed the divorce. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this. But does it really matter? You and I built something real." I stared at her, barely believing the audacity. Real? Claire, we're not even legally married. I've been your affair partner this whole time. For the first time, her mask cracked. Her eyes hardened. Don't twist this. You knew I loved you. Don't pretend a piece of paper changes that. And in that moment, I understood, she would never admit what she'd done. She would lie, twist, blame until her dying breath. If I stayed, I'd spend the rest of my life gaslit into believing the problem was me, not the fact that she'd built our relationship on fraud. I told her I wanted out. She scoffed, muttered that I was dramatic and would come crawling back once I calmed down. But I didn't feel dramatic. I felt, for the first time in months, steady. I moved into a small room above Joao's café the next day. It was cramped, the bed sagged, and the bathroom faucet leaked, but it was mine. No lies in the walls, no hidden papers in the drawers. Just me, the sound of coffee machines downstairs, and the quiet relief of finally choosing myself. The decision hurt like hell, but it was mine. And it was the first step toward something Claire could never take from me, a life built on truth, even if it was just my own. 3 months have passed since I packed a suitcase, left the flat, and handed Joao a month's rent for the room above his cafe. It's amazing how quickly a life can shrink, from an apartment full of shared furniture and promises to a single room with peeling paint and a tiny balcony. Yet, for the first time in a long while, the air around me feels clear. At first, I grieved everything, not just Claire, but the man I'd been when I believed in her. I missed the way I used to trust easily, the way I believed love meant safety. Losing that innocence felt heavier than losing the marriage itself. There were mornings I woke up expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen, only to remember she was somewhere else, probably weaving new stories for someone willing to believe. But living alone forced me to see things plainly. Claire hadn't just lied about a piece of paper, she'd built an entire life on half-truths, using charm as cement. And I had volunteered to build with her because I wanted the dream more than I wanted proof. That's a hard truth to swallow, but an important one. Little by little, I started reclaiming pieces of myself. I learned the tram routes, started jogging along the river, even joined a Portuguese class where nobody knew me as Claire's husband. I began laughing again, real laughter, not the strained chuckle I'd perfected when I was pretending everything was fine. Most importantly, I stopped asking why she did it. Some answers don't heal, they just anchor you to a past you're meant to release. What matters is the choice I made to walk away from someone who would never choose honesty over convenience. To anyone reading this who feels that quiet unease in their relationship, that tug in your gut telling you something isn't right, please listen. Don't gaslight yourself the way I did. Respect is the floor, not a bonus feature. If someone asks you to trade your peace for their secrets, you don't owe them that sacrifice. I'm not naive enough to think this is the neat end of the story. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a path I'll keep walking. But I know I'll never again let someone else decide how much truth I deserve. Thanks for sticking with me through this saga. If my story helped you or made you feel less alone, leave a comment or a like, not for me, but so others scrolling late at night can see they're not the only ones clawing their way out of a beautiful lie. Take care, friends.